As a minister, it's always a little hard to know how to talk about secular holidays in church. Some ministers take the approach of not mentioning them at all. You could go to church some places today and there would be no acknowledgement that this Independence Day weekend is part of the rhythm of our life. Other ministers, take a kind of a hardline pro-patriotic approach, and others would use this occasion to really critique America in particular as part of our religious faith. And I have to say, preaching a year ago in Berkeley, California, and preaching today in Dallas has challenged me to think about different ways to approach how to talk about this. In Berkeley, it would be expected, I think, to be critical of America on a day like this. In Texas, I think that we're more aware of what we're grateful for about our country, what works, what doesn't work. It's a complicated balance. And some may say, why even talk about this in church at all? I respect that. But I am not afraid to go there on complicated topics. And so I want to talk about today what I think is Jesus' appeal to community, which is not patriotic, not sectarian, not based on a particular kind of approach to politics or a particular political party, nor is it based really necessarily on a particular way of being religious that is a denominational affiliation. So not political, not sectarian, but an approach to community that appeals to our best selves to build the best possible community we can, locally, nationally, globally. And I think the words he shares with the people that he was trying to build a community with are applicable to us in that pursuit, whether we think about Cathedral of Hope, whether we think about the city of Dallas, whether we think about our country, whatever communities we're aware of and grateful for today. I think that Jesus has guidance for us. And I was particularly interested, as I thought about it this year, about what it is that people who are on the margins sometimes of a group have to say, or what they see, what's important to them about community. So I was looking for sources like Richard Blanco's beautiful poem, which our ensemble group performed for us with the music. I think it was even more thrilling to hear and see this than it was to watch Richard Blanco read that poem at President Obama's second inauguration a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, nearly. And Richard Blanco was a gay Latino poet, the son of immigrants. He was invited to do the inaugural poem, the first Latino, the first gay person, the youngest person ever. And he had a vision for the day about what he hoped he would accomplish that I think also are in sync with Jesus' invitation to community. This is what he says he was trying to achieve that day. My poetic sensibilities understood these as the most endearing and enduring qualities of the American spirit. One today, that's the name of the poem, became an extension of those values and fundamental beliefs that I wished America to reconnect with as a nation village, especially in light of so much strife and political division in recent years. In my mind, the purpose of being the inaugural poet and of my poem was to transcend politics and envision a new relationship between all Americans. I wanted America to embrace itself, so to speak, and to recognize, feel how we are all an essential part of one whole. If only for those few minutes when I would stand at the podium, finally I grasped the underlying tension I'd been searching for in the name of the poem, namely the wishing for, the striving for, the ideal of being or becoming one, not just for a day, but every day. I came to understand the poem as a kind of prayer, as an invocation, with an appeal to our higher selves as its emotional center. Though it's a secular poem, it doesn't really mention God, though there are hints about deity in it. It is an appeal to our best selves to build an ideal community. And I believe that that's what Jesus was hoping for too in the first century in Palestine. We're now Palestine and Israel. I think that he was trying to build a community that was evocative of people's best selves, and that the church inherits that as a legacy, as an anticipation, as a promise, as a blueprint of what we should be like when we gather in community. Jesus was walking along. He saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And Matthew got up and followed him. Jesus is at a point where he's choosing the people who will be leaders of this new community, this revolution, really, that they're hoping to achieve in religion and society. And Jesus makes a startling choice. His earlier choices were people more like him, but this time he crosses a line and he invites someone to be a leader that would have been scandalous to most people who were observing, to religious people especially. Matthew, it says, was a tax collector. And I know that we've heard this before, but I want to emphasize it again, what that meant in first century Palestine. A tax collector who would not really be popular today either necessarily, but in first century Palestine had another meaning too. It was a person who gathered the tax off of the people, who worked in collaboration with the occupying Roman government. So he was seen as a collaborator in the oppression of their people, not just someone who took their money. Both things were true. It was not the kind of person who was well-loved or well-liked, and someone who could no longer participate in the community life of Jewish Palestine at that time. So when Jesus walks up to him and invites him to be part of this, it's a message to the religious people in particular and to the patriotic people. I'm going to try and do something different. I'm going to mix it up. And I see something in this person that maybe you can't see. And maybe he sees something about us that is necessary for us. This is the gift of being the outsider at times in our lives. In one way or another, we see things that others don't see. And there are ways that we can relate, I know, to times being at the center of what's popular and other times being on the margin. Jesus chooses Matthew for who he is, for what he can be, for what he sees. And then Jesus is invited by Matthew to dinner in Matthew's house. And not only was Matthew there, but there were many tax collectors, and sinners came and were sitting with Jesus and with the disciples. Now, this also has more meaning for us. In a time when it wasn't considered appropriate to eat with people who were different from us. I'm not sure that's so different today either. Jesus was invited by Matthew to go to his home. Jesus didn't say, "Come and be like me." Jesus went to where he was to learn from, to benefit from, to experience Matthew's hospitality. The one who was accustomed to exclusion exercised hospitality to Jesus. And when he got there, here's what Jesus found. It wasn't a bunch of religious people, perhaps like him, who were there, but perhaps not surprisingly, Matthew had other tax collector friends. And not only other tax collector friends, but sinners. Sinners. So a sinner in the Bible, in this first century text, has a very technical meaning. If you're used to thinking of sinner as being a person who, when told "thou shalt not," does anyway, that's not really getting at it. If you're thinking of sinner as something that people are intrinsically somehow, which is what sometimes Christians have said, for example, about gay people. It's who you are, you're wrong. Not something you do, but who you are somehow. So it makes us nervous to hear this language of sinners, I think, and appropriately so, because mostly the people who use it against people, well, let's just say they may not be living entirely up to the best standards of their faith. Sinners means this in the first century text: someone who is not observant, someone who doesn't live up to the ritual laws, someone who finds religion burdensome to the point that they're no longer even trying to participate in the community life. So you could say that they are people who failed to be religious. But really, and I think Jesus means this, they are people whom religion has failed. There's something about the burdens of being like others and observing certain laws and whether or not they made sense anymore, and being a particular way with no room for dissent or diversity. This is what Jesus prizes about sinners. They are not burdened by religion, and they do not allow themselves to be oppressed by it. And so they are branded sinners, but I'm not sure that makes them bad people. These are the people that Jesus is drawn to for who they are, for what they see, what they know. He sympathizes at heart with people who can't live up to the expectations of others, but who nevertheless soldier on and live life as best they can. Jesus walks into a group of people who literally would not be allowed to worship with, or more properly, would not be allowed to worship with him when he went to religious assembly, to synagogue, to church, if you will. And these are the people that Jesus hangs out with. So the religious people are quick to note, and he hears from them immediately. What does it take to get their attention? Consort with the wrong people. The Pharisees saw this. The Pharisee means religious person, observant, highly observant religious person. So not particularly someone who's a Christmas and Easter Christian, but a hardcore every time the church is open Christian. And I mean that. I mean they're very bound up or very caught up, shall we say, in the observance of religion. And they don't say to him, wow, this is fascinating. Your faith is motivating you to be with people who are different from you. They say, why does your teacher eat, especially eat, because this is a way of sanctioning them, a way of approving of them. Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? And they name these two groups. Jesus overhears them speaking to him. Perhaps he was tempted to say, rather than speaking about me, you could speak to me, but he doesn't. He just engages them and doesn't bother with that. He just says, I want you to think for a moment. First of all, those who are well have no need of a physician, by which he means this, I think. The people who need community most are the ones that I want to spend time with. The people that you can't bother with. The people that don't see what I stand for as healing or liberating. Why should I waste my time with you? I need to be around people who understand the need for change, for liberation in their own lives, in the community. I don't think he's casting aspersion. Jesus doesn't stigmatize illness, so we layer that on sometimes. But Jesus is simply saying, if you're sick, you need a doctor. If you're oppressed, you need a liberator. If you're not happy with who you are or the way things are, you need someone who will inspire you to believe that it can and will be different as a result. And then Jesus says to the religious people, I want you to go to your Bibles and check out Hosea 6:6. And then he quotes to them from the prophet Hosea, who says, as he says, for I, meaning God, desire steadfast love, not sacrifices, meaning not church worship. That's what sacrifices refers to, temple worship, to bringing animals to the temple for sacrifice. The knowledge of God is more important to me than receiving your burnt offerings. And so then he updates it and says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Jesus calls to account the religious people by quoting the Bible to them. I'm sure they were a little annoyed at this. And he says, this is the most important verse in the Bible. This is how we read the Bible, through this lens. And for him, the Bible, of course, was the Hebrew Bible, not the New Testament yet. But he says, this is the most important verse. If you see the world and people through this lens, then you will understand what I stand for. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not judgment. I desire mercy, not distancing. I desire solidarity, not feelings of superiority. Mercy is the key. God's tender love, God's tender unconditional love for all of creation, for everyone, for all people. This is what Jesus was passionate about. And he was so passionate about it, he had the nerve to quote the Bible to religious people to say, chill out, back off, calm down. There's a sense of urgency in this when he says this, and it's a direct engagement. This would not have been seen as a light sort of dinner party, cocktail party conversation. Jesus was taking on the visible religious establishment by calling them to account to their best religious values and to say, don't use those to make yourself different from or better than others. I have come to call not the religiously observant or the righteous, not the people who think they've got it all worked out with religion, but the sinners, the people whom religion has failed. And I think that Jesus' principle for community organizing speaks to us still in our personal lives, in church, and society. This has been a week where I've been very aware of how religion is used sometimes to differentiate, to separate, to judge, and to condemn. And I know some of you will not agree with me on this, but I'll share it anyway, in the best hope that you will form your own religious and moral convictions. That is what the United Church of Christ stands for. It says, the minister is there to teach, but not to tell you what to believe, to open this book so that you can make your own decisions. But on Monday, I have to say I agreed with Justice Ginsburg, one of the 3 women Supreme Court justices who dissented from the majority opinion offered by all male Supreme Court justices about contraception, the availability of birth control. I want to remind us of something. We may have different ideas about this. In the Protestant tradition, the Reformed tradition, the one that values science, intellect, reason, the reason there's a Protestant church at all, in that tradition, contraception or birth control has never been condemned. I don't know where all of a sudden it jumped from one religious tradition to another. But we do not, as a whole group, when we gather at Synod at the United Church of Christ, we affirm pro-choice and we affirm women's right to access to contraceptives. That has been true since 1971. And it has been true in our tradition forever. For whatever reason, some religious people say there's only one religious position on this. And it isn't. I desire mercy. So I do believe that when we hear Justice Ginsburg's voice calling all of society to account, to say, pay attention to what the women are saying on this issue. All of us, male, female, transgender, must listen to what she's saying. I think that she's speaking with that same voice. I desire mercy. And I think in the church, it is especially important to affirm that we believe in the equality of women, in the dignity of women, in the right of women to make choices about their own bodies. This is something that, when I was in seminary, I was taught this about ethics, that one of the principles of ethics is that the people who are affected by a decision must have a voice and a vote in how that decision is formulated and implemented. So there is something flawed about a decision about women's bodies that comes through the authority solely of men. So I want to I believe that both principle here is ultimately not partisan. It's to evoke from us our best, most compassionate selves. How do we be one community? And in this case, I think it means being protective of women's health concerns. And I say this in a church that's largely male, largely predominantly, let's just say, not solely, of course. But on a typical day, 80%, sometimes more. It has to resonate from our collective faith in the same way that our activism and advocacy for HIV does. Another situation this week where I was thinking about what Jesus said, I desire mercy and not judgment and not sacrifice. On Wednesday was the 36th or 38th anniversary of the Supreme Court permitting the death penalty again. So there was a period of time when it had been banned, and then it was reintroduced as acceptable and allowable. And Texas in particular has taken to it like no other state. It's one of the things we're known for. And I believe that Jesus is not, of course, saying, don't hold people accountable, but our best selves, our one heart, does not give us the right to perpetuate violence through acts of violence that are not reversible. Jesus is calling us to a higher standard, to restorative justice, not to execution, not to acts of execution. This week also, I'm sure you saw this, some of you saw this, pictures from California. I had California shame this week, I really did, in Murrieta, in Southern California. That's how we would say in Northern California though, but that's Southern California. It's not like us, it's all over California. Pictures of the residents there turning away buses of immigrant women and children who were flown from Texas to California. I mean, what are we thinking? And turning them away with very, very ugly public acts. Stop the illegals. And I kept thinking, what would Jesus say about this in the words of, I desire mercy, not judgment, trying to hold us account to our better selves. I know that we probably have a variety of opinions about this topic, but I hope this, later this summer, when immigrant children are brought to Dallas, I hope we will greet them with open arms and not turn them away like the people of Murrieta did, and that we will do our best to provide a refuge and a home for them while they're here, and to make sure that they are cared for and hear voices of love, not voices of judgment or hatred in their time among us. And here's the other way I felt about this passage. This verse just kept working my brain and working my spirit. Last Sunday, as you came to church, and you've probably seen stories about this in the news, you may have seen or driven over the number 666 written on the driveway here, marking our property. And other places throughout Dallas were marked in the same way. The Oak Lawn, the Legacy of Love Monument, a number of other places. And it was Gay Pride Day. No coincidence, I'm sure. And it was meant to intimidate us, to mark us. 666 refers to Revelation 13:13, where a number is described as the mark of the devil, the mark of the beast. It's a complicated verse. It doesn't have to do with religion at all, but with the Roman Empire. And still, it meant something. It meant something here. It was meant to bully, to intimidate, to horrify, to desecrate, to blaspheme, whatever. I don't want to make too much of it, but we got the message. And it doesn't matter to me what that came from, a group, an individual, a person with psychological problems, or a political movement. Still, it was meant to make us feel unsettled in this place we call home. And I was so moved that people from the Cathedral went right down there to the Legacy of Love monument and started scrubbing it off and cleaning it off. It was people from here who did that. And I want to say this to us. These words of judgment have no power on us. Whoa. She doesn't like them either. These words of judgment have no power over us. We respond to acts like that with love, with the words of Jesus, mercy, mercy on you who did this, and see if we can't engage ourselves in relationship and build a community together where acts like that don't even ever happen. So today, I say to us, we have much to be proud of, much to be grateful for. We have challenges. I hope that we can rise to Richard Blanco's invitation to be one today, every day. And to Jesus' words, learn what this means. I desire mercy. Amen.